way through. So I am calling this working session of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the District 8 City Councilor. I'm also the chair of the City Council's Ways and Means Committee, and joined here by my colleague, Councilor Liz Braden from District 9, Austin Brighton. This working session is being recorded. It's being live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and FiOS Channel 964. It's part of the City Council's budget review process, which encompasses about 35 public hearings and working sessions. And the working sessions are councilors only, and they're an opportunity to get questions on the record in advance of our hearings with the department, so the departments can come prepared to answer those questions for us. The hearings are sort of held department by department, and we invite public testimony at all of them. So we hope you'll get involved. You can come to a hearing directly, and you can find the whole calendar at boston.gov/council-budget. And share your testimony about a department at the end of its hearing. You can also come to one of our two remaining hearings that are dedicated to public testimony. So on May 25th at 6 p.m., we'll have one focused on testifying about the BPS budget. And then on June 3rd at 6 p.m., one that's focused on any aspect of the budget testifying. And the idea with both of those is they're at 6 and we go straight to public testimony. It's not, you don't have to wait for a presentation or anything. So if the evenings are more convenient, that's a great time to come. You can also go to boston.gov/budget-testify and actually find the way to testify and upload a video. If you want, we'll add it on to the relevant department hearing, even if you can't make it. Or you can shoot us an email at ccc.wm. That's ccc.wm as in mother at boston.gov. And if you send us written testimony, you'll get added to the record. So we hope wherever you're watching and whenever you're watching, you'll find a way to get involved in this year's budget process. You can also informally tweet us your questions using the hashtag BOSSBudget, that's BOS budget. Today's hearing, or today's working session, I should say, is on dockets 0524 to 0526, orders for the FY22 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations for the school department and for other post-employment benefits. Dockets 0527 to 0528, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations. Docket 0529 to 0531, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. Docket 0537, order authorizing a limit for the BCYF revolving fund for FY22. That's the full set of dockets for the budget plus a BCYF revolving fund. But our focus area today in this working session is going to be BPS commitment 1, which is eliminate opportunity and achievement gaps. Basically, we've organized our hearings with BPS at their request according to their strategic plan. And so the types of topics we'll be covering in our pair of hearings with them next Tuesday on opportunity achievement gaps include the opportunity and achievement gap policy alignment, implementation and progress, workforce diversity, curriculum bias review, code of conduct implementation, disproportionality, social and emotional learning and wellness, family liaisons, social workers. Both of those are proposed to have significant increases in those workforces this year. School psychologists, nurses, trauma and crisis response, behavioral and mental health supports, and HERN for our homeless students. And then inclusion, the second part, we'll be talking about specialized academic support. So that's inclusion, SPED and SPED transitions, ELL and bilingual education plan, tutoring, vacation, and summer programming. So that's what we're going to be talking about with BPS next week. This is the opportunity to put questions about that on the record. And then additionally, we're also putting questions on the record for Boston Centers for Youth and Families about their department and their revolving fund. And then Youth Engagement and Employment, YEE, which runs the Summer Success Link program and also the year-round jobs program. So mostly a youth-focused working session today in preparation for those hearings next week. I think what I want to do first is, Councilor Braden, I'll offer you the chance if you have questions that you want to jump in with now. I think we'll probably do BPS and then BCYF and YEE, just so we can kind of keep them organized. But I've also got some that I can jump in with if you want a minute, either way. You're muted, Councilor Braden.
Why don't you start? Why don't you start? I had BCYF questions, but go.
Oh, no, we can, well, honestly, I'm happy to reorder.
No, I need time to collect my thoughts, so I'm making notes. On you go.
Okay, all right. I'll put some questions for BPS on the record. So one, is it just about whether retention for teachers of color has increased? That's something that we talked about quite a lot, workforce diversity. And again, not just how to hire a diverse teaching and workforce, but then how to retain them. So, we're curious about exit interviews they've done. They were talking last year about doing those and sort of how the working environment can be improved to better support them and sort of where we are on that, because it's a long-term issue in the system. I think that we definitely want to talk about the special education budget. It's about $305 million in FY22, which is an increase of about $12 million or 4.1% from the FY21 adopted budget. So just would love to understand what are obviously when we see an increase, some of it is just kind of normal cost increases, and then some of it is sort of new stuff. So it'd be great to understand what's new. And specifically, I think BPS is planning to dedicate $5 million of the ESSER funds, ESSER 2 funds, which are part of the federal money for BPS, for interventions with disabilities that address the impact of COVID-19 on their learning and well-being. So just would love to understand that as we're talking about special ed, what that looks like. Is the other $6.9 million all permanent funding, or is that also federal funding? And again, is that real increases or just kind of cost increases? And also just to know a bit about because obviously in planning how to spend $5 million to better support our students with disabilities, BPS has to have some sense of what the particular challenges have been coming out of the year of COVID. And I think we've all heard loud and clear from lots of parents that the year of remote learning has not worked well for many students with disabilities. But I think we'd love to learn more from the district about kind of what their plan is to be proactive as we go into the year ahead. And then curious, this is a question that other colleagues have asked before, but sort of understanding how many students with IEPs are in private placements that BPS supports, and sort of what our route is towards supporting more of those in BPS, and similarly for the high need students and DCF involved students placed in group homes who require private placement, which I think is at about $42.5 million in FY22. Just understanding what are our student populations that are not being served in BPS, and what do we need to do to serve them better. I think we'd love an update on the status of the inclusion rollout in detail. I'm just skimming through a couple of these. There's also $2.25 million in ESSER 2 funds that are dedicated to interventions for ELL students in FY22. Would love to understand what those are, how many students they're going to support, and then I think the big question overall, and I stressed this with BPS at our last hearing, but it really is like, how are they going to use the ARP funds? How are they going to use them in ways that sort of wrap around our students with support, but don't create huge cliff effects in staffing? Because obviously we can't count on this money 4 years down the road. And then also with kind of, how are they thinking about their student supports? And then there's also sort of one-time things like major facility investments that in some ways that one-time funding is well suited to. And just while they're forming a stakeholder group and doing lots of meetings, I think the council does need more kind of their sketched thoughts, at least about proportions around that ARP funding. So, and it seems like a bunch of the students who we're talking about today, and a bunch of the topics, mental health and homelessness, and just a lot of the ELL and special education students who have been most disproportionately impacted by sort of the realities of pandemic school, I think we really want to understand how the federal funding at a overall level is interacting with their needs in the year ahead. So that's a handful of first round BPS questions from me. We've also been joined, or we were joined. We were joined for a moment by Councillor Wu, but then I think she just dropped off again. So I'll see if she comes back. Councillor Braden, did you want to add anything on these BPS topics?
Some similar themes to what you. I have been contacted by constituents about special education related services for children with special needs in parochial or Jewish day schools. It seems that, and my understanding is that there's federal that this funding comes from several buckets, that there's federal funding and state and city funding, and that state and city funding doesn't allow those services to be provided in the school, the parochial school or the Jewish school, but that federal funding does have some more flexibility. So I'd like to get a better understanding of that. And then, in terms of support services for hearing impaired children what's the best term for those? There's schools that are outside the BPS. In terms of, funding for specialized services, how much is assigned? How many students are involved with this? And do they have enrolled that needing additional services? And how is it administered? That was one of the big ones with regard to special education. That's the big one for now. Is there anyone else to ask questions?
No, but I've got some more on my end, so I'll just and I've got a bunch I need to read into the record. I think one of the topics for this set is curriculum bias review, and I think we'd love to get an update on that. But also, I feel like the sort of inverse of that is equally or even more important, which is the kind of like curriculum inclusiveness review. Like, how do we not just make sure that our curriculum isn't biased, but that it's like really something that we feel like is kind of introducing students to, a full picture of history, is making them feel like they're part of the story of Boston and beyond. And so would love to hear a bit about that. And then I think, disproportionality and discipline is really an area that we're all pretty concerned about. There's, been a lot of discussion lately about the McKinley schools, the three of which are in my district, and kind of how we make sure that our schools that are targeted at behavioral help really do that and are not just kind of a funnel into a school to prison pipeline. And then, there's been a lot of growing evidence about kind of the disproportional disciplining of Black girls and boys in particular. And so just would love to hear a bit more from the district, both not just about what we're doing, but about like what our data is, what we gather on that front, how we track that would be great. And then obviously this is going to be the hearing where we hear in detail about the family liaisons and social workers that are being added. And so I've put a few of these questions on the record with them already, but just understanding if you're the one social worker in a school, sort of what does the support system look like? How are we making sure that we're going to retain these folks, that they have a clear sense of their role, good professional development and support. Same thing with the family liaisons, those are kind of entrepreneurial roles. You have to be reaching out to all these families, and they can be amazing, but just making sure that these folks are going to have enough direction and support would be important. And I think Councillor Sabi George is sending over some questions that I don't have yet on inclusion, but definitely, we had several dedicated hearings on it last year. I feel like there's a lot of things that, have been maybe difficult to implement, like in terms of inclusion roadmap, I think has in certain ways probably been blocked by the the COVID-19 year, but it would be great to understand where we are on that, because we're all trying to get to a more coherent system of inclusion in the district. Yeah, and then we did have a hearing in the council, a dedicated hearing a few weeks ago about the summer programming, but it was at the point of them just being about to launch it kind of out to the public. So would love to get an update on where we are, how many spots we foresee having, and all the different options, and what we're doing to get those options out to all of our young people, because I think we want to have a really, really robust summer. And just again, trying to understand on the ARP and ESSER federal funds that are going to be spent in FY22. Presumably some of them are going to be spent on the summer. So June, July, August, mainly July, August. Obviously we need to know, at this stage, sort of what that's looking like in order for those funds to be spent. So would love some more clarity on that. And also related to a question that Councillor Mejia had asked, what the four-year graduation rate and dropout rate for our students with disabilities, behavioral health issues, and our low-income students is sort of how those different demographics and subpopulations, how graduation rates there compare to the rates for the student body as a whole. Yeah, and then I'm going to switch over to BCYF, if that's okay with you, Councillor Braden.
That's good. Yes, thank you.
So on the BCYF side, there's a couple of external funds, Double Up Food Bucks and Boston Eats with Children's Hospital that are going to zero. Just understanding what that means. Are those programs sunsetting? Have they been moved somewhere else? Kind of just knowing a bit about that, since we do get significant external funding for some of the BCYF stuff. Understanding kind of the specific role of additional new employees. The contracted services are increased due to the summer programming. Just would love to understand, besides transportation, sort of what the main contracts there are. And also the large increase to the repair and service to equipment line item. Just a bit of a check-in on, we had, a move of some programming out of BCYF and into HHS last year, and trying to understand sort of what operational differences that has involved and whether it's working and what needs to be ironed out. Yeah, that would be great. Let me see. For most of BCYF's performance measures, the goal for FY22 is to meet FY19 performances, but the number of teen visits is much below the FY19 number. So just wondering why that was. And then just there's some funding being put into developing kind of anchored gender specific programs at 7 BCYF sites for sort of girls time only programming citywide, to help support the efforts to close the gender gap. And just want to understand sort of details on that, make sure that it's inclusive of trans and non-binary youth, and just hear a bit more about that initiative. Also be great to understand the new data system BCYF's implemented, how it's going to let them monitor and adjust programming. And then just if you could talk this effort to make BCYF free, I think we're all very excited about just what the actual nuts and bolts of that is. There's a membership fee policy that it says it was going to introduce for all of our sites. So we're just confused about, is BCYF going to be free on a means tested way? Is it going to be like optional membership fee? Like what's the structure of all of that? If they could talk a bit about STEAM-based programming, that would be awesome. I know we talked a bit about growing that in the past. And then whether, what potential federal ARP funding type uses BCYF could foresee, hoping for, anything that isn't already in this budget. And then if we could just talk a little bit about Native American and Indigenous youth, and sort of what BCYF's outreach to that community has been, and what the sort of possibility for youth in that community for whom Boston's a hub, but who may come from, all bordering places to Boston, like to be involved in BCYF stuff, whether that's a possibility or not. Because one of the things we've heard recently is that community is hubbed in Boston, but it is sort of dispersed, and it can be a limitation for getting support for their youth. So just wanted to talk a bit about that. All right, Councillor Braden, BCYF questions?
Yes. I'm very
and Councillor Braden, before you go, I just want to note we've been joined by Councillor Flynn and Councillor Flaherty. Hi Ed, hi Michael. So I'll let Liz go, and then we're on questions for BCYF. So if you have any questions for BCYF, I'll go to you two next on that. So Liz, go ahead.
Number one, the Jackson Man Community Centre is the only BCYF centre in our district. It is going to be closed next July 22. We are very concerned that there's no sense of urgency about how we make plans for accommodating the services that are there. It is a voting place for 5 precincts. It's an emergency centre, is lots of different functions, and I really would like to see a clear plan for what's going to happen in July. We can't leave it to July to figure this out. We need to start doing it now, and have a really robust community conversation about relocating it for the short term, and then what a new centre looks like. The other issue I have is we have 2 Commonwealth housing at Fidelis Way and Faneuil Gardens housing. Our youth over there, they haven't had youth workers for many years, and COVID has exacerbated a situation where our youth are getting into trouble. And I would really like to see if BCYF could. There's one youth worker position at the Jackson Man that is open and is not vacant at the moment. I'd like to see if we can really restore youth worker services to these 2 facilities and make sure that they're on site at the locations and working with the youth in their natural environment, so that we can sort of avert these young people getting into trouble and ending up in the juvenile justice system if we can avoid it. So this is really a critically important issue, and it's very, very, we want action. Those are the 2 big issues: the plan for this youth for the BCYF centre, and then the youth workers for Commonwealth Housing and Fidelis Way. Fidelis Way and Faneuil Gardens, those 2. Thank you. Oh, I did see in the budget that there in 2020 there was an appropriation for youth at risk. There was $33,284 in the budget, and that there hasn't been any money for youth at risk in this budget coming and past budget. How do we define youth at risk, and how are allocations made to this target population? And that's all for me now. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Councillor Braden. Yeah, and I'll just add that I've had some great conversation with SOAR and the folks there, particularly interested in how they partner with DND. But I think they moved out from under BCYF to HHS, but definitely want an update on kind of the SOAR youth housing, youth employment nexus there, because I think, they're working on obviously helping folks who might otherwise get sucked into violence find alternatives. And one of the chicken and egg things that happens sometimes is somebody can get a job if they've got a stable place to stay, but then they can't make first and last because they don't have a job yet. And so, I think finding ways as a city to overcome that's pretty important for getting our young people on a path into solid employment. All right, Councillor Flynn, anything on BCYF? And then we ran through some initial questions for the BPS topics for next week, so I can refresh. Let's do BCYF now, and then I can refresh what those are if you have any questions on those. But
well, thank you, Councilor Bach. Appreciate your strong leadership on this, on these issues. Yeah, on BCYF, the Quincy Community Center, there was $250,000 allocated, authorized to replace auditorium seating, and the status is listed as to be scheduled. So I'd like an update about when that is going to happen. That's important. I'd also like to get an update on some of the renovation plans BCYF has scheduled for the Blackstone as well. I know that building is needs some repairs, and it's critical that we provide some upgrades and to the Blackstone. And I'm also interested in the programming aspect as well, BCYF. What is some of our outreach to young people during the summertime, whether it's sports programs, whether it's working closely with BPS, tutoring programs, athletic programs, but what specifically are we doing this summer to engage our young children, young adults into sports, into after school summer programs, reading programs, technology programs. So I would like to get more of an update on that. That's all I have, Madam Chair, on BCYF, but I did have a couple issues on BPS. Is this the time for me to weigh in?
Yeah, why don't you jump in with the BPS issues too, and then I'll go to Councillor Flaherty. So Councillor Flaherty, if you want to be ready as well with BCYF and BPS, and then once we've done that, the last thing we haven't done yet is YEE, the youth employment stuff for the summer. So go ahead, Councillor Flynn, with BPS.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Bach, for letting me go into BPS, and apologize for being late to this hearing. With the increase of anti-Asian racism, are there any programs planned in FY22 to help students who might be bullied or face discrimination in the classroom? Are there specific training for counselors and staff as well to support students who are dealing with racism and discrimination? The other issue I had as it relates to BPS, what is the plan in FY22 to improve on translation interpretation services for students and families who speak a language other than English? This is an issue I've focused on a lot. I've actually had several conversations with BPS superintendent as well, and she's been responsive to my requests and is working with me on this. So I want to acknowledge her partnership, but I always think there's more that we can be doing for our immigrant students and their families, because not only do we need to educate the students, we also have to provide critical services to families as well. Maybe it might be continuing the food access program. Maybe it might be helping them get childcare issues, or working with immigration. Whatever the issue might be, there's wraparound services that are also needed. And my last question, Council Bach, is are there any programs or funding for anti-bias training for teachers and staff? Is there funding for conducting a needs assessment for the AAPI immigrant in other communities with specific needs as well? Those are my comments, Council Bach. Again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak out of order on these.
No, thank you. Thanks so much. Those are great questions, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Michael Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll pick up where Councillor Flynn left off. Obviously, with respect to commitment one, we need to see some more meat on the bones on that one. So I know that BPS has not really shared all the materials on that. So really want to stay focused there. Obviously, with the achievement gap and the wraparound support services, those are critical to getting our students back on track, particularly as we come out of the pandemic and sort of the the lost hours around curriculum and study, and try to make sure we get kids back to their grade level. But it's a lot deeper than that. It's trauma crisis support. It's behavioral mental health support. It's social worker and psychologist and nurses. So it's the full court press. So I really like to sort of see more specifics from BPS on their commitment one, and then just shifting gears to BCYF. Really more during the previous administration, the Menino administration. Oftentimes we had our community centers that they weren't necessarily aligned with what was going on in their respective communities. We literally had folks working in community centers during the day when children were at school, and then when the school bell rings and the kids now sort of head to the community center, some of the workers were going home. They had put a full day in. So I think a lot of solitaire was being played, and wasn't a lot of sort of what we sort of envisioned from our youth centers. Clearly, some of them were senior centers as well. So I really want to get a sense in terms of on the demographic piece of that is which of our community centers are supporting our seniors, and what are their hours of operation, and are they appropriate for our seniors, and also our youth, which centers are sort of geared and catering to our youth, and are those operation hours consistent with the hours that we need them? What good is it if a community center is closed or not fully functioning or doesn't have any programming when we need it the most? So I know that the Walsh administration went to great lengths to sort of realign that, and I just want to make sure that that commitment is still there. That I know it was a work in progress. We had folks that were working in certain community centers for extended periods of times, and it was a complete disruption to them and their schedules, et cetera. So it's been a few years now, so I really would like an status update on all of our community centers, and I guess the populations that they're serving in their hours of operation, and let's see if they match up with the need around the programming. And of course, as we again come out of the pandemic and head to the warmer months, particularly in the summer, making sure that our community centers, our pools, our cooling centers are ready to go and open for business for our youth and for our seniors. So that's it in a nutshell. Just want to get into the weeds and get a little more specific, Madam Chair. I appreciate the work you're doing and appreciate this working session.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Flaherty. And we've also been joined by Councillor Ricardo Arroyo. So I'll go to him next. Councillor Arroyo, if you had questions for BPS on this commitment one stuff, and then also BCYF, those are the two that we've covered so far. And then we'll do a last round on YEE youth employment stuff. So, but if you wanted to chime in now with your BPS and BCYF questions, that'd be great.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm coming in a little late, and so I don't, just in the interest of not having them repeat answers, is it possible for me to submit answers to the chair to send to them so that I don't have to re-ask questions on BPS that they've already answered? And then...
Oh yeah, sure. No, I've also got, I think your team sent over BPS and BCYF questions from you, so I've got those already. If you didn't, I wasn't sure what you were coming in to add, if you wanted to change those.
No, those are basically the same. I think the one question that may have already been asked and answered perhaps is the summer youth programming. I know last year we added about 8,000 jobs or so. And I think at least from what I understand, the goal is to sort of surpass that or to keep that. And so I just want to know what the summer programming plans are for that.
Yeah, so we'll ask YEE for all those details. But the basic gist is last year we went up to 5,000 city funded jobs, which got us to the 8,000 total, because there was like 3K that were being done by private actors.
Yep.
Normally that's flipped. There's 5,000 done by private actors and 3,000, well, it was 3,300 like done by the city. So the good thing is that this budget commits to keeping the higher 5,000 job number funded by the city. So I think the hope would be that
private partnerships step up.
Yeah, that they go back to their old number, and that then you're back up at a significantly higher overall number of summer jobs. Although probably I would bet that, we're probably going to see maybe some more on the private side than last year, but maybe not as many as a regular year this summer. But it is good news that the support for 5,000 is in the it's in the real budget, because last year the money to fund that came from the CARES Act stuff. So there was definitely concern about it being a one-time thing.
So that sounds great. And then I'm just going to let us sit on the questions we sent you before so that we're not taking up too much of time here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Awesome. Sounds good. All right. And then, and then I'll go to Councillor Braden and Councillor Flynn, if you had anything on the youth summer job specifically, since that's the one, the YEE stuff is the one that we haven't covered yet. And then I've got a bunch of YEE questions because I'm somewhat obsessed with the summer and year-round youth jobs program, but I'll leave mine last just because it's kind of long. Councillor Braden, anything on that?
Thank you. I know we've discussed this in another hearing. I think we're onboarding like 5,000 young people for summer jobs. I think you had some concerns, or someone raised a concern about just the onboarding process and whether or not Health and Human Resources has the capacity to do that in an expedited way, and if they need resources to do that, to make it happen. So just making sure that, our city infrastructure is able to support all that sudden rush of young people who want jobs in the city. And then also in terms of thinking about summer jobs, where the jobs are available by district, I'd like to know the city departments that the jobs are available in, and the numbers of jobs that are out by district, and the job types and what sort of locations the young people have. And also in terms of, I don't know if we're ready for, thinking about your concept of conservation core, just trying out ideas about bringing our young people into parks department and different departments that will give them some exposure, and perhaps see if we can get that whole concept moving. I don't know where we're at with that, by the way. If we could, piloting your concept of a conservation corps would be really great. So those are just some of the thoughts I had about the summer jobs.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the support on both those fronts. I definitely think that we have talked a lot about the fact that the funnel through our HR program is imperfectly designed for getting 5,000 young people onto the City of Boston payroll, and it ends up with young people who are delayed sometimes by weeks in starting their summer job experience. And I think that's really, it shouldn't be the case. And it's predictable. It happens every year. So we've got to figure out how to solve for it. I know there's been some process analysis and internal work, but it feels like we still haven't quite gotten there with the HR procedures. And so, that's a great set of questions for us to ask. And then, there is $1 million new in the Environment Department for a Green Jobs program, which I think is a opportunity to sort of open the door into our conservation corps stuff. But I think that you're making a good point that I also want to stress that there's a set of programs that have been funded by SuccessLink that are kind of like conservation corps mini programs already with our youth. And what they really need is a kind of connective tissue and some support for the workforce development piece. And I think that would be a great place for the green job stuff to start. So I know that the city's probably still in the process. I know they're in the process, and we'll be talking about it with environment of kind of figuring out what that green jobs money looks like. But it feels like a connecting up with YEE on this would be a good first step in the opening months of the fiscal year. So,
get their feet wet and get them enthusiastic about conservation work. Yeah, very good. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Councillor Flynn on YEE and youth jobs.
Yeah, thank you, Council Block. I'm just looking at my notes here for a second. I received a constituent request asking about YEE receives external funding for youth jobs and partners with community-based organizations on these opportunities. Can we talk more about which organizations they partner with and how organizations can reach out and partner with YEE? That's one issue. And then, as it relates to youth jobs as well, my question is, how do we reach youth that might be difficult to reach? They might live in public housing. They might have limited access to the internet. Their parents might not speak English, so they might not get the necessary reading brochures. So my question is, how do we reach out to areas or populations, I should say, that can be challenging, and how are we targeting them to make sure that they have equal access to some of these programs and jobs as well?
Great. Fantastic. I'm sorry. Are those all your questions, Councillor Flynn? I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. Thank you, Council Block. That's it for me.
That's great. And I totally agree. I think that's key. It's like, what if we have these jobs and then our young people don't know about them, it doesn't do them very much good.
Right. No, and what I always thought about is the development side I represent, the public housing development side represent. It's hard to reach youth in there, and without an organized effort, without an organized campaign, you're not going to have much success. So, I would like to know about specifics. Like I'm interested in the nuts and bolts of how you do it. Do you walk up to their door, knock on the door, and provide brochures in a certain language, or do you call for a meeting at the recreation area, or do you communicate with one of the tenant task force leaders? Those types of questions, in the weeds are what's important to me, is knowing how you communicate, because walking through Mary Ellen McCormick or walking through West Broadway or Old Colony, you need to have a sense of the area and the people to effectively communicate as well. So just some of those logistic challenges are as important as anything, Council Buck.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. And we felt that when I was at the Housing Authority, we felt all the time like there were a lot of city departments that didn't really know how to reach our young people. And it was a source of continued frustration. So, and I agree with you. It is that tactile. It's also just like people who are willing to go, in the buildings and knock on doors in the hallway, and sort of work with the Housing Authority and others around that can be really key. So
I think this brings back to my previous question of BCYF about youth workers in public housing complexes. Expecting the kids to go to the BCYF center. It happens in some cases, but a lot of the time they don't like to leave their comfort zone and they stay sort of siloed in their complex. So I think having a youth worker go there and then be able to tell them and promote youth programming and summer programming and broaden the horizons a little would be really helpful. I think we need to sort of thread these things together, so there's better connectivity across departments and more communication across departments.
Absolutely.
Council Block, I just have one final comment. What I always thought were the best days of the summer were Unity Days at BHA. I used to love going to Unity Days. There'd be different activities for kids and seniors. There'd be some music. I always went with Billy McGonigal, and we had more fun talking to the residents and listening to the residents. but I think Unity Days play a critical role in the life of BHA residents. But can we, when and if we do have Unity Days, I would encourage that we have them. Can we orchestrate, this opportunity where we're able to have someone from, the city of Boston provide the necessary documents for youth jobs, for after school programming for kids and, food access, let it be an opportunity for us to, give kids and parents and the seniors an opportunity for a fun afternoon, but also providing important, relevant information as well, including youth jobs.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think using those Unity Days, which I think came to be originally under Ray Flynn.
Yeah, right.
I think that, and I think your dad, the mayor, he still comes to some of them. I know I've seen him at the one at Mary Ellen. Yeah, I think you're right. Using those as an organic way to reach the housing authority populations is a really good idea. Although by the time they fall in the summer, they're a little bit late for recruiting to the summer jobs program, unfortunately.
Yeah, we were at the last one at Mary Ellen McCormick. I was with my parents, Mayor Walsh, and several others. And they were serving hot dogs and soda. But I'd rather have a hot dog and soda talking to BHA residents than being at one of these fancy steakhouses on Boylston Street. The company at BHA, you can't beat it. Those are real the heart and soul of Boston right there. So it's a lot of fun representing a large BHA community. So I'm proud of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Very much agree. All right. Well, thank you, Councillor Flynn. And I am now going to put a bunch of my questions for YEE on the record, and then I'll read some questions that I received from colleagues into the record as well. So for those who are here in person, feel free to go to your next thing.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
No, thanks. Thanks so much for being here, Councillor Braden. So on the YE front, so one is just to underscore something that Councillor Braden brought up, but this idea, I think between Codman Square's green infrastructure program, and the sort of urban forestry stuff at ENC and Speak for the Trees, and like a bunch of our kind of environmentally focused Success Link programs. Success Link really hasn't had the bandwidth to support from like a content perspective, that like set of programs. But I think, I do think we should take some first steps in that direction as part of kind of the green jobs stuff. And so would love to see some plans afoot for that. I would love to hear in detail YE is proposed in this budget to add 2 staff members. I think that's super key. A kind of deputy director, and then also someone to work on evaluation. Would love them to come, of course, prepare to talk to us about those 2 hires. And I mean, with the evaluation piece, I think that's so key, knowing what we're doing is working to, for young people, and to set people up with other opportunities. I do sort of hope that I guess I'd love to understand what the deputy director specifically is envisioned to do. There's a couple of things that I certainly feel as a counselor we need more capacity at YE on. One of them is partnerships and kind of being in communication with all the stakeholders. And so interested in whether they're going to be doing that. Another one is kind of program support and development. So helping to make sure we have like high quality experiences that are what young people want to do, and that expose them to neat things. And I think that, and also think about like some degree of continuity across programs. So by which I mean, like, could we have a shared orientation for all of our, all of our programs. Maybe it's something on Zoom, but just like kind of help set people up. Cause I do think that the support for young people, especially for whom it might be their first time kind of coming in regular hours at a job or whatever, I think that support can be uneven depending on the sponsoring organization. So just thinking a little bit about that. Another really big innovation for this year is the introduction of the grants, the direct grant program for lots of like partners, instead of where the money goes to them and then they can pay it out. And obviously that our hope would be that that would somewhat relieve the pressure on the city employment system and just the sheer amount of paperwork that young people have to line up to be employed by the city. But what I would love to understand is kind of how many of our partners have opted for that grant option. And thinking about, I think I've already expressed to YEE that the rollout of that was it was sudden, and it wasn't something where we'd consulted ahead of time with people about how to do it. So it came as kind of a surprise. And I definitely think that because there wasn't the consultation about exactly what like ways to tweak it to make it most attractive and workable for partners ahead of time, I'm hoping that there's going to be that kind of focus group assessment kind of now that like having run through the first process of that. So would love to hear anything that's already come up. I know that I've heard that sort of the question of how much money is put aside for fringe and the administrative piece of this doesn't seem like quite enough. So would love to just hear a little bit more about how many takers there were on that, how many of our youth we expect to be going through that process, as opposed to through the City of Boston process, and what the City of Boston process improvements can be. I would love to just hear about, in general, hear about how both those things, partnership, communication, and the program support can be improved. And then onboarding would really saw firsthand last year that there were a lot of young people who we didn't onboard on time. Granted, last year was insane for a whole host of reasons, but would really love to understand the details of what our performance on that was like last year and other years, and sort of what our targets are for actually getting our young people to start their jobs when they'd hope to start their jobs. And then I have some questions that I wanted to ask, kind of coming from advocates. As folks know, we have a very active community of youth advocates and advocates for youth jobs. Some of them are youth and some of them are not. But they had some questions that kind of chimed with mine. And so I wanted to raise a few of those. One is just, one is about eligibility. So I think this has come up several times, but the kind of idea of extending eligibility, 14 to 22-year-olds for all the jobs. Right now, we let 19 to 22-year-olds do the, I think it's 19 to 24-year-olds actually, we let do the supervisor jobs. But, making a broader set of jobs available to that age group, also lowering the age limit to 14 as opposed to 15. And, we've had a bunch of back and forth with YEE about it being important to enable BCYF's program, and that's why we don't do the 14. I think just for our young people, that's the age of a lot of our high schoolers. It's just a little bit frustrating to be held off that year. So would love some clarity about that. Would love to know. I also think, I think we're doubling the number of supervisor jobs, which is great. Would love to think about whether there's a way to make the supervisor job scale, like to have some jobs that pay a bit more, like it's not much of a bump to be a supervisor in this. And maybe for sometimes you are just kind of an older youth who's participating in a slightly leadership role, but sometimes, you're really like running a program in a significant way. And I think we could probably do more on that front. Would love on the year-round jobs front to understand there was a commitment last year to do 1,000 year-round jobs. There's a commitment this year to do 1,000 again. super excited about that. I think I said this already, but like super excited that we're, coming back to the 5,000 summer, 1,000 year-round job number. I think like at base level, that's critical. That's the direction that we have to be going with this program, is growing it. And so doubling down on where we were last year is great. That within that, then want to understand, last year, how many of those 1,000 youth jobs, year-round jobs did we actually make happen? What period do we make them happen for? My understanding is we're still kind of stuck at November to April. I think, a lot of us would like to see that kind of move more into the September to May, June kind of school year jobs length. And it did seem like maybe we were having some breakthroughs with the system to allow us to enroll people faster so that we wouldn't have this necessary delay of several months to flush the summer jobs out of the system and enter the year-round ones. So would love to know where we are with that, and prospects for moving some of those year-round jobs into a September start. And as I think we discussed before, also being able to keep continuing youth in the system, I think really makes a difference. But would love to know the ages of the young people who were hired during the school year, what weeks that program was running for, how many of them sort of started on time, which I think ended up being December start this year, and how many started later. And then on the summer front, really want to understand from last year how many youth we had starting in each of these weeks. Because I know from direct experience that it was not most of them starting when the program started. And again, that's not faulting our YEE folks who work super hard on this. There seemed to be a bunch of administrative hurdles. And then last year was weird just because the whole program got up and running so late. But would love to have that kind of map, because to me, if we just measure number of jobs, we don't measure duration and when we started and what the experience is. I don't think that's great. And I also think that in the, part of what we're doing is setting our young people up for future work and careers. And I think in most of the working world, if you've got a start date, that's your start date. And it doesn't kind of move in the way that our YE programs sometimes have. I have some additional questions that I'll add into the record afterwards, because it's a lot to ask, but understanding also, I forgot, besides the dates of start, sort of how many hours young people worked in kind of brackets over last year. So just like a bunch of that quantitative data about what our program really ended up looking like last year in the summer and year round. And then I think really asking YE, especially with this proposed additional capacity, how the sort of outreach and co-planning of these things is going to shift. Because I think we continuously hear from partners that they only hear about things once they've been decided. We hear from young people and youth jobs advocates that they only hear once things have been decided. And I think, people appreciate lots of steps in terms of the directions of travel of YE are pretty reflective of a lot of conversations that have been had. But, sometimes the devil's in the details in terms of how it actually works for everybody. And it would be great to be able to use that staff capacity to have a more consultative process on with the advocates and the partners on some of these things. I have a bunch more YE questions, but like I said, I've jumped around on my sheet, so I'll add some of them in for the formal request. And just really want to underscore, I take going to 5,000 this year as being a commitment, in the city that we're not going back, we're going better, right? We're going to keep growing the youth jobs program. And so that's great to go from funding it with CARES to funding it in the budget. Obviously this year's budget is bolstered by American Rescue Plan funding. That's for the proposal. So just want to be clear that this is not just a pandemic surge, but something we expect to continue doing. And then it would be great to know how we can kind of get more partners engaged in the school year jobs program. I think with that increase to 1,000, again, last year, we definitely heard some bumps along the road in terms of people being kept in the loop about when that was going to happen and the portal and everything. So would love to get more partners involved, and not have folks who think they're going to have people involved in the fall find that they're not really going to have them involved until Christmas. and therefore functionally until the new year. Yeah. And then one other thing is just, as we think about program development, we hear from a lot of youth programs that they end up having to fundraise to support kind of add-ons that we don't fund through the YEE program, but would be really helpful for running a great youth program. So they're like, oh, we really need additional, mentor kind of, older youth. And so we create another one to hire, or we've got to have, or we're using complicated tools. And so we need more adult supervision. And so we do see a lot of kind of building around the edges to make Success Link work. And obviously, we're always looking to be partnering with our nonprofit partners. But I wonder if YE might think about, could we have kind of startup grants or something that kind of supports innovative programming and gives people a little bit more of a cushion to do that work around the edges? I think that would be great. And then, one second. And then I think it would also be great to understand if YE could share with us, because I believe it has done initial allocations of spots to programs, if it could sort of share across the board, like, what does that look like? Like how many spots are going to partners who took the grant option? How many to partners whose folks are going to come through the city of Boston? What are those different programs? Then within the city ones, I think Councilor Braden asked this, but what departments are we? Last year we sort of talked about doing blue shirts. We didn't really do blue shirts, but we did do a thing at the Parks Department that was fairly large. So what did that look like? And can we just have a table in general of the number of jobs each organization is set to host? And then also, I think my office was hoping to host, and I don't think we've heard back yet. So that's a very particular Councilor Bach question that we would love to know the answer to. Okay. And I think with that, I'm going to transition to reading a few questions from colleagues who weren't able to join us or were only able to join us briefly. So let me just check. Great. Okay. So from Councilor Mejia, questions for BPS. The BPS website lists members of the OAG task force. Could they explain how the members of the task force were chosen and how the role of student voices can be included? Then in regards to code of conduct implementation, could the administration provide us with some data around code of conduct violations by demographics? What percentage of code of conduct violations were issued to white students compared to students of color? Then last year, we saw a cut in socio-emotional learning and an increase in socio-emotional intervention. I think this is a line item thing. This year, we're seeing a proposed cut in socio-emotional intervention and an increase in socio-emotional learning. So what's the reason for these numbers going back and forth? What's up with that distinction in the line items? One thing that a number of parents have made very clear is that special education services are critical and need to see greater funding. However, we are seeing cuts to SPED early childhood, SPED lab, and SPED programs for the physically disabled. What are the reasons for these cuts? And then how are we using this new federal funding to help create trauma-informed services for students who need help readjusting back to in-person classes? How can we do the same for teachers who have had to bear the burden of making all these adjustments? And then I'll go to Councilor Arroyo's questions for BPS in this set of topics is, how is BPS working on making sure that BPS's OAG, Opportunity Achievement Gap, strategic plan is implemented across all strategic areas and not just concentrated in a few? Specifically, how does the FY22 recommended budget fund the OAG policy? Which aspects of Commitment 1 are receiving funding and which are not? So, workforce diversity, curriculum bias review, ethnic studies, et cetera. Where's the money? How is BPS evaluating and identifying curriculum bias? What progress, if any, has been made on reducing curriculum biases, and how will the FY22 budget address this? Is BPS planning on updating the code of conduct this year or sometime soon? The last revision was in September 2014. If there are plans to update the code of conduct, what are the areas BPS will be looking at changing? Does BPS have a breakdown of code of conduct violations, and does it track violations throughout the year? If so, can BPS provide a breakdown by gender, race, and ethnicity for code of conduct violations for SY 19 to 20 and SY 20 to 21? Could BPS also provide a breakdown by the type of violation? Given the pandemic's impact on housing insecurity over the past year, what new resources are being invested in HERN? And then how does BPS determine how many days a school psychologist is in the building? And how does BPS determine this on a school-by-school basis? So those were from Councilor Ricardo Arroyo. Now we'll go to BCYF, questions from Councilor Mejia. It's great to see programming created specifically for young girls. I'm curious to see how we can build off that to include programming specifically for other young people, such as LGBTQ plus youths. The document we received from BCYF mentioned that, quote, we will implement a membership fee policy for all of our sites. What will that process look like and how will that impact low-income communities? This is the same as my question about what's going on with BCYF free and this membership policy statement. Like if they could just explain that in detail to the council, that'd be great. And then the document also says that we'll work with the City of Boston Language Access Coordinator to expand translation and interpretation within BCYF. What will that process look like, and what options do people who speak languages other than English currently have to access BCYF services? Then Councilor Arroyo also asked about the decrease in the Children's Hospital Boston Eats grant, the double up food bucks, those eliminations that I had asked about, and then also with regards to the decrease for the Tiny Tots program grant. Then he asks, is BCYF planning on applying to any future rounds of the youth homelessness demonstration program? In 2021, there seems to have been a drastic decrease in community center visits 2020, I should have said. Program participants, programs offered, and teen visits. Presumably that's related to the pandemic, but can you talk about those decreases? Why is there a $500,000 increase in non-personnel line item for sports and fitness? What represents this increase from 0 in FY21 and 564 from FY20? Where did BCYF redirect its savings in utilities, office furniture and equipment, and miscellaneous supplies and materials? And then of BCYF's 39 contracts, only one is WBE and none are MBEs or SLBEs. How is the department planning to increase the number of WBEs, MBEs, and SLBEs? And for those watching at home, WBEs are women-owned businesses, enterprises, MBEs are minority-owned business enterprises, and SLBEs are small and local business enterprises. And then Councilor Arroyo also asked about the BCYF revolving fund. For FY20, expenditures of the revolving fund far outweighed the receipts. Was this due to COVID? Does BCYF draw from the operating budget when the expenditures are higher than the receipts there? That'd be great to understand. And I will just add, because we're in BCYF, because I forgot to earlier, that just I would love an update on things at the Tobin, whether there's any investments planned there on the programming or capital side. Since it's the only BCYF center in my district. Unfortunately, kind of the youth and family and senior center stuff is all left to the private domain in the rest of my district, which is a thing that I regret and wish that we could make a sort of long-term plan to change. And then and I see also we've been joined by Councilor Edwards. One sec, Councilor Edwards, I'm going to come to you. And then also just would love to hear a little bit about the Hennigan, which is just over the line. It's in Councilor O'Malley's district, but we've definitely heard some agitation for refreshes and rethinking that BCYF center. And so just anything the team can share about that would be great. Councilor Edwards, we have reached the stage of this where I'm reading some of the questions from councilors who weren't able to join, and the councilors who did join have asked their questions and jumped off. But since you're here, we can interrupt that programming. And if you have any questions for these BPS commitments, BCYF or YEE, happy to hear them now.
Can you hear me?
Now I can. Yep.
Okay. I won't interrupt the process as I understood how you described it. I'm having a hard time hearing you. So I'm having technical difficulties on my end. So I apologize, but I'm going to go ahead and let you continue your process until I can figure out. I'm hearing every other word from you.
Okay.
So.
All right. Well, I'll read. I've just got Councilor Arroyo and Mejia's questions for YE left to read. So I'll read those and then maybe, how's it now? Is it any better or still coming in and out? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, we'll see. I'll give it a go. All right. And then back for Councilor Mejia, asking for YE, in addition to the 5,000 youth jobs, how can we use this funding to create opportunities for year-round jobs for young people? So we know that there are these 1,000 proposed, but I think more detail on that and reports on what happened this year and how we can go even better next year would be great. And then how are we thinking creatively about all our city contracts and finding ways to create employment opportunities for young people throughout them? So throughout the city, can we create jobs for young people? And then Councillor Arroyo asks, YE expanded its summer youth program in FY21. Is YE planning on keeping those jobs going forward? Yep, we talked about that a bit. So we can leave that actually off. And then what does the Youth Lead the Change program look like in terms of process? Who participates in the program and how is outreach conducted? And in the request for information from the council, YE announced that DYEE will be moving forward with grant funds for summer 2021. And that it will, YE will serve a grant stewardship role. How will YE ensure that funding is stable and consistent? How will YE ensure that this aspect of success links not overly dependent on external fund availability? So just understanding that as we move to the grant model, that we're then going to sustain the grant model, I think is important. How does YE conduct outreach to youth and other participants in the summer employment and school year employment programs? That's related to Councillor Flynn's question earlier. And then does YE track demographic information on participants in the Youth Lead the Change program and employment programs? If so, can YE provide these figures? So those are the questions from council colleagues. And now I'm going to go and see if Councillor Edwards is having any better luck. You are, great. So now would be a great time to put your questions on the record, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you so much. This is just for youth employment, or are we going to do?
No, we can, no, so we've done all three, so you can do all three.
Okay. Well, I won't.
Take a sip of water as you choose,
I'm good. But I won't, a lot of the questions in terms of youth employment and matching what we did last year with this year have already been put on the record, so that I would reiterate some of those questions. I do think one of the questions I would have is specifically around pipelines that the youth employment is using, partnerships with ROCA, partnerships with SOARS, our street outreach, and then also partnership with some of our worker centers with semi-documented, documented, documented youth. So I'd like to know how our pipelines are working and making sure that not only that we just have diversity, but an experience around the city. I think I would love some statistics on where a majority of the jobs are going right now for youth, and break down some of those demographics. So are majority of them going to East Boston? I don't think so. But and then of the ones that are going out, how many are young men versus young women, and what's the average age? So I'd like that information. When it comes to BCYF, I know there were several movements to try and streamline payments for membership for BCYF. I believe that as part of the Joy agenda from Acting Mayor Janey, those fees have been waived for this year, for the summer, either way. But I do know that there was still a question of when fees do come back, if they do, how are we making sure they're consistent? How are we making sure that they're essentially accounted for? And making sure that we aren't in our fee structure setting up for inequalities. And then what was the other department I had?
There's a bunch of BPS categories that we're talking with them about next week. Mainly opportunity and achievement gap stuff, special education, mental health supports, a whole bunch of things.
So with that then, thank you so much, Councillor Bach. There were several questions I had in terms of our commitment to either guidance counselors or a nurse in every single school, and how with the recovery, especially I think the kids are going to be dealing with post-pandemic stress disorder, whatever we want to call it, and the impact on that. How is BPS setting up a system to assess our kids, to make sure that their mental health is a priority, their mental and emotional well-being, and how are we actually setting up a real system for kids to access those resources? I do know when it comes to some of the food access in BPS, I know I've gotten some complaints from my parents about kids eating lunch on the ground outside. I have, and someone could address this, but I have basically said it seems like it's more of a balancing the moment. This is not a permanent policy, but in as much as we're going to have kids back at school, we need also to have them back at school, but also figure out a way in which we can safely have them eat together. And it looks like this was the in between. I think it's temporary. I just want that confirmation. Mm-hmm. And then I think, there's always and it came up in a recent conversation. I don't know if this is the right section, but since we're dealing with safety in schools, the school police officers in schools. Again, I'm not sure if this is one of the budget items, but really dealing with that issue and making sure that's a concern that we have, obviously, in information. And so how are we accounting for that? I know that there's some FOIAs, and we're also still in the middle of the information session, information sharing ordinance as well. And I think that was, and then we're also moving for digital equity, right? There's an ordinance, and there's also just in general analysis. So what permanent digital infrastructure is any of these systems keeping and expanding upon now that we're kind of getting out of the pandemic? I actually think there's certain things that are worth keeping. And so I'm not really sure if BPS is keeping, or you're going to record all your lessons maybe going forward, so that kids can, if they miss school or if they're sick, and they can watch them. I think it's time to be creative with the infrastructure we built out, and how it can actually further assist and expand education opportunities. So those are some of mine, and I apologize if any of them were repetitive. But yeah. No,
those were great, Councillor Edwards. And not
Thank you.
All right. Well, and I think with that, unless you have anything else, I'm about to gavel us out. So
I'm good.
All right, great. In that case, thank you to all the counselors who shared questions today. We will be getting those over to the BPS, BCYF, and YEE teams shortly, and we'll be meeting with them in hearings next week. So if you're a member of the public watching this, just so you understand, this is called a working session for a reason. It's obviously a bit informal. It's just counselors. We're reading off questions. It's maybe even a little boring. But, because of the open meeting law and the importance of sort of public access to our deliberations, we do these working sessions as a public thing. And then that just generates this list of questions we send over to the department. So if you're interested in hearing more, you should come to the department hearings next week, virtually, which are on Tuesday for BPS, both in the morning and afternoon, and then on Thursday in the morning for BCYF and in the afternoon for YEE, Youth Engagement Employment. So so looking forward to those. And in the meantime, this working session of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee is adjourned. Thank you all.